start the screen share. Can you see that?
Yes.
Is that good?
Yep.
Okay. Welcome. As she said, my name is Dan Bice. I just was figuring out this is my 23rd year of teaching classes at St. Matthews and other places. And by day, I'm a columnist with the Journal Sentinel. And on my off time, I do adult education. All right. I mean, we do a lot of different classes here, and we'll be doing more later on. I'm going to have a lot of information. It's not going to be quite like a Marquette class I had to teach this week, where I had to talk for 2 hours nonstop with a mask on, which sounded like something. I thought I was speaking for an hour, and when an hour was up, they said, "Oh no, we have another hour to go." What we're going to do is I'm going to talk. There's a lot of information. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat or the questions, and we'll try to get to it. Next time next Sunday, we'll have more of a conversation about these issues. But I'm going to sort of try to lay the groundwork. As a good journalist, I'm going to do the what and the who this week of Christian nationalism. And I wanted to teach this class after the October 6th riot and what went on there. And I've seen that a lot of churches are doing classes on Christian nationalism as a result of it. And there's going to be 4 parts to the talk today. The first one, we're going to revisit January 6th and what happened on that day and who was involved in Christianity. Second, we're going to talk about what is Christian nationalism and what it is not. Third, we're going to take a test that political scientists give to see if you are a Christian nationalist or if you're sympathetic to it. And then finally, we're going to talk about the worldview of Christian nationalism and how many people think it's just tied to abortion and same-sex marriage. And I'm going to suggest the implications for this worldview are much, much broader. And we're going to touch on 2 subjects at the very end, COVID and how your view of Christian nationalism affects your views on COVID, and 2, how it affects your view on racial issues. As I said, buckle in and we'll take off. So at the events at the Capitol on October 6th, there was a lot of Jesus imagery. People were singing hymns, they're posting signs, there were crosses. Here they are getting ready to enter into the building after the rally, Jesus is King. And then the large flag that you see, there's the Christian flag that you see all over the place. People brought Bibles with them. And this right here is part of a march that went on. It's called a Jericho March. It's a relatively new thing where people, conservative Christians, Christian nationalists get together, march around the Capitol building 7 times. It's based on the story in Joshua, where they actually walk around the city of Jericho 6 times on 6 consecutive days. And on the 7th day, they walk around it 7 times. And on that day, the whole city collapses. And it's sort of a gruesome story. They commit genocide then. And the only person who's saved is a prostitute named Rahab. Here, no buildings are demolished and there's no genocide that goes on. But they started off about abortion, and then they changed into election, the Trump election, and hoping that governments would overturn what they were doing. They quit doing them on January 24th, when many of the participants showed up armed. Don't you hate when that happens, when you're having a rally and a bunch of people show up armed? Here's another one, a guy with a "You Need Jesus" hoodie on. I tried desperately to try to find this somewhere. Apparently none of the places I shop have this particular article of clothing. Here they are smashing in the windows when the rally turned into a riot. You see the Jesus flag there. This Jesus Save sign was just about everywhere in the media coverage because it was right out front. And then you had a lot of people doing devotions at the same time. So one thing that many of us didn't see when this happened is this video inside the Capitol that occurred that occurred. The video came out a week after the insurrection by a New Yorker magazine reporter. Let me find the part. Here we are inside the Senate chambers.
Jesus Christ, we invoke your name. Amen. Amen. Let's all say a prayer. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for gracing us with this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Amen. For this opportunity to stand up for our God-given unalienable rights. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving the inspiration needed to these police officers to allow us to go in, to allow us to exercise our rights, to allow us to send a message to all the tyrants, the communists, and the globalists that this is our nation, not theirs. That we will not allow the American way of the United States of America to go down. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent creator God, for filling this chamber with your white light of love, with your white light of harmony. Thank you for filling this chamber with patriots that love you and that love Christ. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent creator God, for blessing each and every one of us here and now. Thank you, divine creator God, for surrounding us with your divine, omnipresent white light of love and protection, peace, and harmony. Thank you for allowing the United States of America to be reborn. Thank you for allowing us to get rid of the communists, the globalists, and the traitors within our government. We love you and we thank you. In Christ's holy name we pray.
In case you didn't see, there was a sheet of paper that he left. That's the guy who's called the QAnon shaman a lot of places, that he posts a note for Michael Pence saying that justice will come. And you know, people responded to all of this, the religious imagery, in a lot of different ways, including our, he wasn't quite the president then, but now president, who said, basically, these aren't real Americans. The funny thing is, the people inside the Capitol building think they're more real Americans than anybody else, and they're trying to save the republic. Joe Biden is saying here, these are not real Republicans. And that was one way to respond to this. Another way to respond was to say this, and that is to say, the people involved are just crazy, and we don't need to understand them. They are just crazy. We need to figure that out. So the first response, they're not one of us. We're different from them. And the second one, that they're crazy and they don't need to be understood. I'm going to suggest a third way of dealing with this, and that is that these people are, many of them, many of them, and this has come out in interviews since this happened, are Christian nationalists. And as Christian nationalists are very, very devout in their support of Donald Trump and of the country. But what is Christian nationalists? These are the two leading experts on this, Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry, and they give their definition. And their definition is, it's a cultural framework that idealizes and advocates a fusion of Christianity with American civic life. And they put an asterisk next to Christianity because they're saying this isn't all Christians. It's a Christianity that means people like us, basically white, native-born, culturally Christian people. Not people who necessarily attend church at all, but people who are culturally Christian. It's a cultural package. The one thing that they also note repeatedly is the way to think about this is like a group of people on a hill being besieged, and that they feel like they're being threatened on one side by immigrants, on another side by people who are rioting, on another side by anybody who's different than themselves. So that's one way to think about it. But this definition sort of leaves me cold. It looks like it's written by some political scientists. I'm going to give you instead a definition from one of the participants in the protest. And this is Jenny Cudd. She looks like a good suburban mom, which she may be, I have no idea, but she's also someone who went into the building and recorded herself going into Nancy Pelosi's office, stealing things from her office and then discussing why she did this. She owns a floral shop in Midland, Texas, and ran for mayor there. And thankfully for everybody, she recorded all this. So she's been charged as a result of what she did on that day, but she discussed her faith and her understanding of America. And this is what she gave us. She said, to me, God and country are tied. To me, they're one and the same. We were founded as a Christian country, and we see how far we have come from that. We are a godly country, and we're founded on godly principles. And if we do not have our country, nothing else matters. I want to break down this statement for us just a second as we go through this. She says, first, she conflates God and country. Basically, to be a good Christian is to be a real Christian is to be a real American. And to be a real American, you have to be a real Christian. And she has a certain definition in there. And then we are founded as a Christian country. So she's talking about the past. And then she says, we have fallen away from that past. And now we need to get back to that. So I'm going to clean up her language a little bit and give you a definition that we're going to work with the rest of this over the next 30 to 40 minutes. And that is, these are my three basics of Christian nationalism. And you have to hold all three of these to be a Christian nationalist. One, you have to believe that the United States was founded by God as a Christian nation. And that's your past part of it. Two, you have to believe that the country has since strayed from its godly origins and is on the verge of collapse. And then three, we have to return to our roots by adopting biblical principles. And what biblical principles are, they differ pretty widely, but those are the three parts. The past, God founded us. Second, we've gotten away from what we are founded. And then three, we need to move forward by going back to the beginning, by going back to the principles. If you were to summarize this into a very short and catchy phrase, you would say, we need to make America great again, according to God. So that's the basic definition that they're going with. Now, a lot of people are sympathetic in America to many elements of this. And as I said, all three parts constitute Christian nationalism, but many of us are sympathetic to the first part of that narrative, that we were a Christian country or we are a Christian country. When you look at this study done by Perry and Whitehead, you see that 26% of Americans say America currently is and always has been a Christian nation. And then the second one, America was but is no longer a Christian nation. So put those together, and you're almost 2/3 of Americans who believe America was at some point a Christian nation. Only 20% says it's never been a Christian nation, and 21% say they have no opinion. So that's something that a number of people, and probably many of you, are sympathetic with. The only thing is, this question does not, this survey question doesn't answer a lot of things. For instance, are we talking about legally? Are we talking about culturally, religiously, or constitutionally? You know, personally, I would say that, you know, constitutionally, we are not a Christian nation, but in terms of culture, we have been a Christian nation in the past. So not surprisingly, given how many people believe we were or are a Christian nation, we have a lot of politicians who reflect this back to us, tell us these things back to ourselves. Here's Mitt Romney saying, and many of these are going to be Republicans because they're most outspoken about this stuff. Ours is a nation which is based upon Judeo-Christian values and ethics. Our law is based upon those values and those ethics. He, as you might know, is a Republican from Utah. And here's Louis Gohmert. The only way any people can truly have freedom of religion is if they have a constitution that is founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And he argues that our Constitution was written with the founders holding the 10 Commandments in one hand. Here's Michelle Bachmann from Minnesota, who ran for president, saying American exceptionalism, the fact that we're different from everybody else, is grounded on the Judeo-Christian ethic, which is really based upon the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments were the foundation of our law. So we'll look at that in a little more detail next week about what role the 10 Commandments did or didn't have in founding our laws. And if we tried to implement the 10 Commandments, how many of them would actually be upheld by the courts. So let's look now on if you are a Christian nationalist, and this is the math part of the quiz, of the lecture. So you might have to do a little bit of basic addition and to come up with where you are. And this is Perry and Whitehead and a number of others have come up with a series of questions, and then they ask how you responded to these to come up with how much of a Christian nationalist you are or are not. Here are the 6 questions that they ask. And as you look at these, there's 5 answers you can give. You could say, I definitely disagree. And if you definitely disagree, that's 0 points. I agree or agree somewhat. I'm neutral, and that's 1 point. I'm neutral, and that's 2 points. That I agree, and that's 3 points. And then I definitely agree. I strongly agree. And that's 4 points. So here's the first one. The federal government should declare the United States a Christian nation. So if you believe that the federal government should do that, you would be either a 3 or 4. If you believe you shouldn't, it's 0 or 1. And if you don't know, that's 2. So then the second question, the federal government should advocate Christian values. Again, if you strongly disagree, 0 points. If you disagree, 1 point, neutral, 2 points. And if you agree, 3 points. And if you definitely agree, 4 points. The federal government should ease strict separation of church and state. Or alternately, if you believe there is no separation of church and state, which there is a group of Christian nationalists who believe that there is no separation at all. 4, the federal government should allow the display of religious symbols in public places. And it doesn't say which religion. As you might know, there's been a fight in Madison for a long time as to what sort of trees they should put there, including a secular tree, whether they should have a secular Christmas tree there each year. The success of the United States is part of God's plan. And then finally, the federal government should allow school-sponsored or state-sponsored prayer in public schools. So if you answered absolutely not to all of these, you would have a score of 0. If you answered definitely yes or strongly yes to all of these, you would have a score of 24. Okay, so let's see how the country fares. Their surveys, they've done this survey a number of times, usually of 1,000 people each time. So here's the breakup of how we go. And they break this up into 4 categories. So those who score between 0 and 5, they call them the rejectors, people who believe in a strong sense of separation of church and state. Then they have the resistors, those who are sympathetic to the rejectors, who are skeptical of Christian nationalism. And then the accommodators, people who are sympathetic to Christian nationalists. And then finally, ambassadors, which is basically their definition of a Christian nationalist, someone who scores between 18 and 24. As you'll see, the strict separation of church and state, someone scoring a 0, 7%, and this is pretty consistent, 6 or 7% score a 0. Only 1% scores a 24. Here's another way to see it by grouping it together. So you'll see if you combine the second 2 categories, there's about 20% of America are Christian nationalists, but you have 32% who are sympathetic to Christian nationalists, who are very sympathetic. And I should probably tell you at this point that I'm explaining this to you as an outsider. I'm not a Christian nationalist. I come out as a resistor in this discussion. I grew up in a fundamentalist family, and I attended an evangelical undergraduate school where I had a minor in history, and I was taught a lot of things about American history that are consistent with this. But in my years that I've been a Lutheran, which is now a little more than 30 years, I've moved away from that perspective. So I fit in the resistor category on this chart, and I'm talking to you as an outsider on this. And it's also important to know that someone like Ms. Tutt earlier is not going to use these terms, Christian nationalism. I asked my brother, who's a Pentecostal minister, if he would teach this class with me. And he was, first of all, he said he'd never heard the term Christian nationalism. And he said he then looked it up and he doesn't believe he is, though I am pretty certain he is. So I thought we could teach this class as an insider, outsider. I could talk to you about it from an internal outsider's perspective. He could talk to you about it from an insider's perspective. The term really became popular starting in the year 2007. There's a New York Times columnist named Michelle Goldberg. She wrote a book called Kingdom Coming. And since then, the funny thing is she wrote that book, and when Obama was elected, everybody assumed that Christian nationalists was a dead movement. But the thing is, the movement tends to swing back and forth. It falls out of favor under Barack Obama, but then is emboldened under Trump. And right now, there's a bit of confusion over what the status is. In fact, there are some Christian nationalists who still believe that things are not resolved in the election. And on March 4th, the government is going to take over. March 4th is the traditional day for the inauguration throughout history. And they think on March 4th, this upcoming week, the military is going to take over and put Trump back in power. I'm not aware if he thinks that this is going to happen, but that's the belief that some extreme Christian nationalists have. And next week, I'm going to talk about that. I think there's a range of Christian nationalists, from those who are a softer version and those who are a really, really hard version, who believe that we need to take Old Testament law and institute that in American life. So the interesting thing is, there is not one demographic factor that ties directly to Christian nationalists. There is widespread support for it among every region of the country, every economic class, every education class, everywhere there is support for Christian. There are Christian nationalists around there. The best predictors for Christian nationalism are actually a set of beliefs. And I'll run through some of them. There are 10 beliefs. I'll give you 5 or 6. One is that you identify with political conservatism, okay? And any one of these in particular doesn't link to this, but the combination of these things indicate that you are likely to be a Christian nationalist. 2, that you believe the Bible is the literal word of God. 3, you believe the U.S. is on the brink of moral decay. So the second one would be fitting in with the future, that that to fix things, we need to abide by biblical principles. The one that we're on the brink of moral decay, that's about the present. And then you believe God requires the faithful to wage wars for the good. 5, you believe in the rapture. And the only demographic factor that ties pretty directly to Christian nationalism is that it's much more popular with the less education that you have. That people who have high school diplomas or less are much more strongly believers in Christian nationalism. That's not to say that there are not trends. For instance, and if you guys want more charts, I can bring these next week and we can look at them. But for instance, Christian nationalists are most prevalent in the South and in the Midwest. They are most prevalent among evangelical Christians, but at the same time, they're not the same as the evangelical Christians. There are evangelical Christians who reject Christian nationalism. They're prevalent within each religious category. Among mainline Christians, about 35% in mainline, I mean Methodist, Lutheran, Episcopalian, about 35% of the people are either Christian nationalists or sympathetic to Christian nationalism. The only group where there are almost no Christian nationalists at all are Jews. There are almost no Jews who consider themselves Christian nationalists. They're very, very strongly in support of the separation of church and state. Here, for instance, is if you take just the issue of being religious, and there's a number of people who are religiously devout, who are not Christian nationalists, who don't believe those three things. And researchers have compared and contrasted those with Christian nationalism. And they were asked the question, what is important to being a good person? Which of these things are important to make you a good person? The first one was to have faith in God. And both categories said, yes, that's an important thing to be a good person. Secondly, to teach others your morals or the morals of your religious tradition. And both of them said yes. Now, from here on, things change and diverge. Is it important to being a good person to help the sick and the needy? Christian nationalists say that's irrelevant to whether you're a good person or not. Religiously devout people, and we're not just talking about Christians, we're talking about Jews, Muslims, others as well. Religiously devout people in America say, yes, that is important. Seeking economic and social justice. Christian nationalists say, no, that's not connected to being a good person. Religiously devout people say, yes, that is important to being a religiously devout person. Reducing consumption. Christian nationalists say that's irrelevant. It doesn't matter if you're buying fewer things or not. That doesn't make you a good or bad person. But religiously devout people say, yes, that does matter, and that is important. And then finally, serving in the military. And Christian nationalists say, yes, that is very, very important to being a good person. And religiously devout people say, that doesn't matter. You can be a good person without having served in the military. And this is an important thing to see with Christian nationalism. The military and militarism is very important. And you can see that support for the flag is important. You know, liking the fact that the military jets fly over football games and stuff, that's all tied in to this here. So there are a number of Christians who've seen what happened on January 6th and said, we aren't a part of that. We don't support that. We are separate from that. Before I do that, I'll summarize Whitehead and Perry's view of Christian nationalism. Put simply, Christian nationalism does not encourage high moral standards or value self-sacrifice, peace, mercy, love, justice, and so on. Christian nationalism mobilizes Americans to take political positions and rally behind candidates that will defend their cultural preferences, preserve their political influence, and maintain their proper social order. So it's a set of beliefs as much as anything else that uses politics to achieve its ends. And you know, it's a funny thing with what happened on October 6th, on January 6th, where people were like, well, this doesn't seem to connect to my understanding of religion. Well, it's a different understanding of what faith is and what politics is. And here's Jerry Falwell Jr., I guess we could say disgraced now, Jerry Falwell Jr., who told the New York Times in 2018, I don't look to the teachings of Jesus for what my political beliefs should be, which is a pretty strong and surprising statement for someone who at this point was head of the religious right and probably had as much to do with the election of Donald Trump as anybody in the country. It also helps us understand this divide where people say, how can good Christians support someone like Donald Trump? You have this thing where it's not all about these social justice issues for them. It's about Christianity as an institution and maintaining the position of white, culturally Christian people and native-born Americans. As I said, a number of groups are now contesting this and arguing against Christian nationalism. There was just this week, 100 evangelical leaders got together, put a statement out there saying that they need to speak out about Christian nationalism in their ranks and oppose them. And there is, it's interesting, there is a sharp divide between evangelicals who are Christian nationalists and evangelicals who are not. Those who are not frequently believe that we should have a social safety net to help the poorest people. The Christian nationalists believe if we have a social safety net, it should involve the church. It should not involve government at all. So other people who oppose this, there's a new group called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And a number of mainline churches have gotten involved in this. This is an ad that they recently put out, in response to Christian nationalism.
I'm a Christian against Christian nationalism.
I'm a Christian against Christian nationalism.
I'm a Christian against Christian nationalism.
I'm a Christian.
I'm a Christian.
I'm a Christian.
I'm a Christian against Christian nationalism.
Against Christian nationalism.
Against Christian nationalism.
I'm a Christian.
I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian.
Against Christian nationalism.
Just recently, this group had a rally, had a conference, Democracy and Faith Under Siege, responding to Christian nationalism. And for those of you who are Lutheran, you'll see that Lutheran Bishop Elizabeth Eaton was there. Here's what she had to say when asked about Christian nationalism. Find the right point.
Well, welcome everyone to this event sponsored by Christian. Show just how pervasive Christian nationalism is in our culture. And so I'm curious to hear where you see Christian nationalism to be the most prevalent from your perspectives as religious leaders. Where do you see Christian nationalism showing up?
Well, I think it's very important to understand that we are not condemning being patriotic. That's different. Christian nationalism conflates our allegiance and our understanding, and even our relationship with God, with a particular secular state, in the case of the United States, to be a Christian country. And so you cannot, by that definition, be a real American unless you're a certain kind of Christian. And for us, for Lutherans, we number our commandments different. So when there are big arguments about which should be in a courthouse, we don't have to worry about that because we number ours differently. But for us, the second commandment is that you should not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And Luther said that this kind of thing of appropriating this is, he said, see, all of this is an attempt to deck yourself out with God's name or put up a good front and justify yourself, my emphasis, or your cause with God's name. And we see that with folks. It's different from patriotism, but when our allegiance is first of all, and our identity and meaning is caught up in Christian nationalism and not in God, then that's a problem. And we can slip into that very easily. We see this in time of warfare, in time of crisis, and certainly we're in a crisis now.
As I said earlier, and this is our final section here, that Christian nationalism is interested in more than just abortion and gay marriage. It's interested in a wide range of issues. And sometimes they're unstated beliefs. It is true that abortion and gay marriage, opposition to gay marriage is very, very important to Christian nationalists, but other subjects are tied to this belief as well. And the authors, Samuel and Whitehead, come up with 3 findings from their study of Christian nationalism. They have a second book. Their first book came out in 2020. They have a second book coming out soon that reflects the results of the recent election, which we'll get to in just a second. Their first one is that Christian nationalists want a society in which families are traditional and men and women stay in their proper places. And they believe this is a biblical understanding of the family. It's not just an optional view. This is their view. Christian nationalists are very much inclined toward authoritarian control, especially when the targeted population is non-white. And that can involve immigration, or it can deal with social justice issues, other issues. They're very much inclined toward authoritarian control in the country. 3, Christian nationalism reinforces boundaries around the group and has a great deal of mistrust toward those who aren't, as I said, native born, Christian, culturally Christian, and white. And then finally, Christian nationalists saw Donald Trump as a defender of the values they believe are being threatened. And as I said, this idea of threat is very, very, very important. And in everything that I've read and all of my involvement, there's one verse that stands out above all others that's used, and it's from Ephesians 6:12, that this battle isn't just an earthly battle. This isn't just a political debate that's going on, but put on the whole armor of God that you may withstand the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. So this is not just a political debate that's happening in the State House. And if you believe that, that elevates the fight that you're in. And there's a lot of warlike talk that happens within Christian nationalist circles. We have a battle over this thing. We're going to war. Blood is going to be shed. Those sorts of terms are commonplace among Christian nationalists. And as I said, there's actually no predictor that shows someone's support for Trump greater than Christian nationalism. For those, if you look just at the 4th category, ambassadors, the white line are white born-again Protestants and how they voted in the 2020 election. 95% of them supported Trump. Among seculars, and this is an interesting thing, when I've had this discussion with other people, they'll say there are secular people who are Christian nationalists. It seems like a contradiction in terms. Why would a person who doesn't believe in God, why are they a Christian nationalist? Well, we actually had a president who was not a very devout person, didn't go to church, didn't know how to hold a Bible upright, and doesn't know what 1st and 2nd Corinthians is, but was very much a Christian nationalist. 82% of them voted for him. And then the blue category, which is white liberal Protestants, those would be Lutherans, that you have 82% supporting Donald Trump. On the other end, those who are firm supporters of separation of church and state, you have very, very few people who are voting for Donald Trump. But let's talk about the other issues besides the obvious ones that we've talked about. Let's talk about the issues of racial justice. And let's talk about the white bars. When people who were in each of these 4 categories were asked the question, do you agree that reports of police brutality against Black Americans are exaggerated by the media? So you have 2 things going on here. You have the idea of views about Blacks, and 2, views about the media. So you see only 8%, 9% of the rejectors, the seculars, and those people who believe in a strict separation of church and state, think that there are exaggerations of police brutality against Blacks. If you move all the way to the further end, 87% of white people who are Christian nationalists believe this is an exaggeration. There's a similar chart, which I didn't provide because I didn't want to overburden you with charts, but there's a similar chart that says, do you believe that Blacks are greatly discriminated against? And it's the inverse of this. 80% of people in this category believe Blacks are discriminated against systematically, whereas only 20% of people in the Christian nationalist category believe that they're discriminated against. Let's take a second issue, not related to any of these things, and this is COVID-19. This chart's a little bit difficult to read at first, but it's just the numbers from 0 up to 24. So if you're at this end, the extreme end, the opposite of a Christian nationalist, someone who doesn't believe America is a Christian nation and shouldn't be ever a Christian nationalist. It should be a Christian nation. When they were asked how important was it to protect the vulnerable, that was incredibly high and important thing with people who supported separation of church and state. Whereas protecting the economy and protecting liberties were very much unimportant to them. But as you became more sympathetic to Christian nationalists, your views about the importance of the economy in relation to COVID-19 increased dramatically, and your interest in protecting the vulnerable drops dramatically. And this doesn't just apply to your views about this stuff, it involves practices as well. So here's the percent of whites who say that they have not taken any of these precautions in the last 2 weeks. Among the rejectors, those people who believe in a strict separation of church and state, you have almost 90% of the people saying they wore a mask in the last 2 weeks, and 85% saying they avoided touching their face in the last 2 weeks. You have 15 who said that they never did this, but in the inverse, 85% said that they did. So then there's a rise with each category, so that you have 3 times as many people saying that they never wore a mask who are Christian nationalists. And the same is true about people who touch their faces. So there's this great divide between people on how they understand what their faith is and how it connects to their political views. And so I brought up this quote from Rainn Wilson. He made this statement, and a number of people picked it up. As you see, 35,000 people liked it. He took it down because it became controversial. But he says, the metamorphosis of Jesus Christ from a humble servant of the abject poor to a symbol that stands for gun rights, prosperity theology, anti-science, limited government, and fierce nationalism is truly the strangest transformation in human history. So how has that happened? And actually, we've just seen through the emergence of this Christian nationalism, that is how it has happened. So I'd just like to wind down here at the 45-minute mark and say, these are the takeaways I want you to take from this discussion. One, that Christian nationalists believe God founded America on biblical principles. The country has since fallen away, and it needs to return to its Judeo-Christian roots. Okay, that's the basic belief. 2, that Christian nationalists are not the same as American Christians. There are many American Christians who are not Christian nationalists. They're not the same as Christian evangelicals or strong religious adherents, the devout. There are lots of people in those categories who are not Christian nationalists. It's a subset, as we saw, about 20% of the American public, with another 30% that's sympathetic. And then finally, Christian nationalists hold strong views on issues far beyond abortion and same-sex marriage. Their views as Christian nationalists are closely correlated with views regarding race, COVID, immigration, any number of these other things. And to whet your appetite for what we're going to see next week, I'll introduce you to a couple people you've probably never heard of if you're not a Christian nationalist. And this has to do with the first part of that framework, that Christian nationalists believe God founded America as a country on biblical principles. There are people, and you can go to conferences where you learn this and you're taught this repeatedly. I went to a thing called the Worldview Weekend, where you spend 2 days just being instructed on America is a Christian nation, and you get all of the facts that support that. And then you're taught views on evolution, and then you're taught facts on how you should vote. And actually, the people who run Worldview Weekend have a local TV show that they run pretty regularly on channel 30. But this is David Barton. He founded a group called the Wall Builders. It's an ironic idea. He thinks there is no wall between church and state. And his point is the founders never intended to separate Christianity from government. Christianity should be our official religion, and the First Amendment was only to keep a single denomination from running the nation. Extremely popular speaker, and now his son, Tim, is taking over his organization. Mike Huckabee said he wished every person in America could be instructed by David Barton on the Constitution. And then finally, Ralph Drollinger, Capital Ministries. He's probably best known because he led a Bible study in the Trump administration at least once a week. 11 of the 15 cabinet members attended every week. Mike Pence attended every week. And he has a particular view about what laws should be like. What he says is God's purpose for the state is to control a fallen people's behavior. God's purpose for the state is to control a fallen people's behavior. He believes all people are fallen. So God's purpose is that the state is to control your behavior. To say it another way that doesn't sound so harsh, it is to outwardly moralize fallen man, using the Bible to decide what you should be and should not be doing. That's my presentation for today. We have like maybe 5 minutes where we can look at and see questions that may have come in. Do we have any? Okay, if anybody, I guess we could talk if anybody wants to or has some thoughts or questions about this. Feel free to jump in.
No, if you put questions in the chat, that's good. Or like Dan said, feel free to jump in. Or if
How
you
do
think
I
of
see
something
that?
during the week, you can just email me and we'll make them part of the conversation next Sunday.
First of all, how many of you are familiar with it looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat. One, how would you respond to someone who fit your definition of white nationalism, but insists that it has nothing to do with race? First of all, I called it Christian nationalism because interestingly, there are Christian nationalists who are doing a lot of work to reach out and try to convert and convince particularly Hispanics to join with them. So while most of them are white, you will have about 10 to 15% of Black Protestants who would fit the category of Christian nationalists, and you have a growing number of Hispanics. But the thing is, it's frequently people don't like to be told. People don't like to be told what they're in. If you ask people, are you a Christian evangelical? The percentage is going to be much lower than the actual number that fit the definition. If you ask people if they're Christian nationalists, their numbers are not going to match what the numbers actually are. And on the inverse, if you ask people if they go to church, for the last 50 years, Americans lie by about a 2-to-1 ratio. About 40% of Americans now will say that they go to church weekly, whereas the number is about 20%. So you can't always trust what people say about themselves. So it really is something. And when they say it's not about race, frequently, again, in this thing, they didn't ask the people, what do you think about Black people? They were asked specific questions about Black people and their experience. And do you think that they're discriminated against? And as a result, you see, I mean, the numbers speak to you better than anything else. It shows that as you become more of a Christian nationalist, more sympathetic, and then when you become a Christian nationalist, it does affect the way that that you do, that you see these things. Hold on just a second. Pull up the questions. Is some of the strength of the Christian nationalism today driven as a response to having a Black president? As I said, and I'll explain some more in the next week, Christian nationalism tends to swing back and forth. That it falls out of favor. And there were a number of, when Michelle Goldberg wrote her book in 2007, she believed that Christian nationalism was on the rise. But when Obama won, there were a number of stories saying the religious right was dead and Christian nationalism was dead as well. Well, we actually then found out that that was not true at all. And I think there was a swing back when Obama was elected, and that Trump actually emboldened people, Christian nationalists, to talk more openly about what they believe, and to, to attend rallies, to attend marches, and to do any other number of things. And so right now we have a swing against that. And I'll talk some next week about the responses that various people are having. I want to tell you about a particular prophet in the Pentecostal faith. They have people who believe that that God talks through them, and that they tell people truthful things from God. And I'll tell you about a prophet who prophesied that Trump was going to win, and what he's done since it turned out that Trump did not win. So yes, I think the influence and power of Christian nationalism has been influenced by the emergence of a Black president. Thanks for presentation. Still, I can't correlate Christian nationalism's beliefs with Trump's personal persona and lifestyle. I think the thing you have to remember is, and I didn't mention this very much, but the Bible is used very, very selectively by members of Christian nationalism. They'll use Jericho to do the marches. They'll use Ephesians to talk about the importance of the debates. They'll use verses in Psalms to defend their positions on abortion. But when things change, the verses that they use frequently change as well. So you have to watch when Bill Clinton was president, Christian nationalists reveal about how we needed a leader who was someone who was moral and honest and all of those things. But those same verses that were used at that point are no longer being used by Christian nationalists. Are there any credible statistics on how many people in the US subscribe to these views? Well, yeah, I mean, the statistics show that right around 20% would be hardcore Christian fundamentalists and Christian nationalists, and about 30% are sympathetic. And I'm going to talk next week about the lesser, and the weaker and the stronger versions of Christian nationalism, from one where you believe it's okay to have prayer in schools, or maybe it's okay to have a scene at Christmas on the steps of the city hall, to those who believe we need to have Old Testament laws put into place. Do Christian nationalists want to save the republic, or do they want to create a nation in line with their ideas? I think the answer is yes and yes. They see those two things as the same. They think saving the nation is by creating a nation that's in line with their ideas. They think their ideas are the correct ones, and if we follow biblical principles, God will reward us. Are Christian nationalists predominantly involved in rural communities or southern states? I'll bring some of the demographic information next week, and we can look at that. More common in the Midwest. More than 40% of the people in the Midwest are Christian nationalists or sympathetic to them, and in the South in particular. But that doesn't mean they're not in the Northeast. They are in the Northeast and they are in the South. As I said, there's no one demographic fact that they're connected to specifically, but they are more concentrated in the South and in the Midwest than anywhere else. And then this will be our last question. We'll end here and pick up next week. This week, as I said, is more of a focus on what and who. Next week, we're going to talk about when and why. Why is this emerging today? And what's going on that drives this? Is the QAnon movement the same as the Christian nationalist movement? No, that's not the same, but Christian nationalists are, research has shown, more susceptible to authoritarian figures and to conspiracy theories. So there are many Christian nationalists who do believe in QAnon, but you could actually be a QAnon supporter and not be a Christian nationalist. But many Christian nationalists would not be followers of QAnon. I mean, I know people who are Christian nationalists who have no interest in QAnon. They are more interested in the Bible and getting the Bible put into place. They don't see grand conspiracies where the people in Washington are running a child trafficking child trafficking system or whatever. So thank you very much for attending the class. Is there anything else you want to say, Sue? So meet us again next week at this time, and we'll pick up and learn more about Christian nationalism. Thank you.